Attack on Titan may not be as popular as it was back in Season 1, but it's still been boasting some strong twists and payoffs with stunning execution. At Anime Expo 2018, Eren's original voice actor, Yuki Kaji, was asked what his favourite part of the show to record was. His answer was a scene from the last episode of Season 2. For that particular moment, the director had told Kaji to act out the scene as he thought best, and that they'd match the animation to whatever he did. Kaji mentioned it was a challenge, and that he normally isn't given this level of trust and freedom with his performance. However, the fact that he was given such an opportunity for this scene is interesting when you consider how dialogue for animation is conventionally recorded in Japan, compared to some other countries. When English-speaking fans refer to dubbed anime, what they mean is the version that's been revoiced in their own language, as opposed to the original Japanese audio with subtitles, which we often refer to as subbed anime. However, in the context of production, the majority of this quote, subbed anime is, well, dubbed. Nani? The word dub itself is shortened from the word double, and dates back to the days of old film. Whether it was music or effects, any sound that needed to be added was doubled or duplicated when recorded on a soundstage, in sync to the picture that would be running. It's even done nowadays when specific audio can't be captured properly on set. There are of course different circumstances when it comes to anime voiceover, including how the actor will get their cue, whether or not multiple actors will be recording at once, or the state of the visuals they're working with, but the general idea is the same. Visuals run on a screen, actors observe the screen, visual timing is mostly locked in place, and actors need to make their performance fit said locked-in timing.
Fun time bingo! Ha! Fun time friggin' bingo! Ha!
In English, we often refer to the dubbing of dialogue as ADR. In Japan, the term often used is after recording, or Afureko. However, what fans witnessed during that moment in Attack on Titan episode 37 was the opposite, pre-scoring, or puresuko, which involves acting without visuals and animating to the voices. I wasn't able to find a historical origin point for this practice in Japan. However, one of the most famous examples of pre-scored anime just happened to have recently celebrated its 30th birthday. When Katsuhiro Otomo was planning the film adaptation for his own manga, Akira, he seemed to understand that there was nowhere to hide on the big screen. Not only was the animation, color, music, and art direction all superlatively detailed, but it's one of the few anime where characters actually form unique shapes with their mouths on a consistent basis.
夢を見たの。街が壊れて、人があんなにいっぱい死ぬわ。
Initially, Otomo only wanted to use pre-scoring in the close-up shots, as they'd naturally be more exposed. However, it ended up being the backbone of the entire film. This method allowed the vocal performances to influence the animation itself, creating a sense of body language that was responsive on a very immediate level, adding a sense of weight and realism. Some visual reference was evidently prepared beforehand. However, as you can see, the actors weren't looking at visuals at all. It is interesting that Otomo initially only wanted to use pre-scoring for close-ups, because in many anime even nowadays, there are some important shots or single lines that defy the lip-flap rule of threes. In a previous video, we mentioned how the majority of talking animation in anime consists of the alternation of 3 generic mouth shapes at a time. One flap is defined by the motion between these generic shapes, hence the term lip flaps. However, some moments can contain mouth animation that's specific to the lines or emotions being delivered, and can't as easily be recycled or reapplied. We can't say for certain which of these examples were pre-scored and which ones weren't, but I think it's a similar principle of exposing more detail for crucial dramatic moments. Meanwhile, in Western animation, tight synchronicity between voice work and mouth animation is essentially the norm.
Read the charges.
As opposed to anime, where dubbing is common practice and pre-scoring is the exception, in most Western countries it's standard to lay down the dialogue track first, with visuals produced around it. This is why we call it Prelay instead, and it's what a lot of us here grew up on.
Here we go! To infinity and beyond!
Doing voice for animation is probably acting in its purest, most ancient form. It's a bit like the Greek form of acting in the ancient Greek where they had masks on. In our case, the mask is the animator's drawings, you know.
Is that a challenge?
When voices are produced as a blueprint for the footage, not only are the actors influencing the resulting visuals, but they also have total freedom with their timing and delivery. At this point in production, there is no animation to sync to, and the voice director also takes advantage of this freedom regarding how they guide or work with the performers.
What does an actor want with a conscience anyway?
Any kind of animation can benefit from reference material, but in Prelay, that can include the recording sessions themselves, in order to carry over nuances specific to the actor. And if a production makes use of character supervisors, that means there are dedicated animators overseeing the movement of assigned characters throughout the entire film.
Ooh, I quiver with fear.
He has a way of playing with the words and twisting them, and it is all interesting. Every line that Jeremy would give me was interesting.
This is what makes Kingdom Hearts so bizarre. It's a game series that features many Disney characters, but since it's developed in Japan, the English-speaking actors need to dub their dialogue back into characters who, historically, originated in Western Prelay.
I would hear in my headphone the Japanese actor who was doing Goofy, who had studied me on how to do like the laugh and everything.
Hey there, Donald. Good morning.
What voice acting, whether it's Prelay or dubbing, is really about is autonomy. The ability to customize the sounds you make as a character isn't just in the name of giving the audience something interesting to listen to, but to lend them insight into how a character thinks without spelling it out. It's about creating layers.
Onions have layers.
The illusion that this visual avatar is a conscious, self-aware living being. They're constantly processing stuff. They've had experiences outside of what we see on screen, and that's why we have the ability to relate to them, whether or not they speak our language. Animators from all over the world have proved that they don't necessarily require dialogue audio to make a character move with a sense of visual autonomy. However, Prelay's distinction is that the voice actors have the chance to inject their own dramatic insight, gestures, and timing-based concepts that the animators, directors, or writers could not predict on their own.
Let's make some magic!
Robin Williams' performance as the genie, created through unpredictable improv, was conceptualized entirely around that understanding, and may even be a more general incentive to cast improv comedians in popular Western Prelay films. But even apart from them, we always hear these stories about how actors made a character their own, and sometimes these are examples of how Prelay actors can use the lack of finalized video to alter a character on a conceptual level. Whether it was Jennifer Goodwin making Judy Hopps more optimistic than she was originally planned to be, or Tim Allen transforming Buzz Lightyear from a typical superhero into a procedure-obsessed cop.
I think the word you're searching for is Space Ranger.
The ubiquity of Prelay in countries like the US can make it seem like the most ideal approach, especially regarding how much freedom it gives the actor.
Animation is so great. It's way better than whatever the alternative is.
Cool, Japanimation.
To clarify, it's not at all uncommon for seiyuu to do after recording with footage that is not kanpake, which means a finished product. Production will be continuing back at the studio, theoretically implying that the acting has a chance to influence the final visuals. In a previous video, we mentioned that one of the reasons foreign dubs don't alter animation is that it would result in an entire video track separate from the original Japanese one, significantly complicating both production and distribution. However, even though Seiyu act in reference to the visuals too, what the Japanese side puts out will be the original video track anyway. If the final performance doesn't quite match, or the incomplete visual preview doesn't yet have mouth animation, then it's possible for some flaps to be tweaked in post before the film or show goes public.
ある程度この口の動きになんかこう合わせないといけないですよね。けど、合わせますよなんとなく。あ、そうですか。
Although it isn't exactly impossible to find unmatched flaps in Japanese dubs even nowadays, whatever the reason may be.
突撃しないの？
油断していたら私たちの理想はつゆと消えてしまうぞ。それよりエレンを連れて離脱しろ。
Editing assets aside, the extent to which after-recording performances will directly influence other aspects of animation on a given project honestly isn't so clear-cut. Just because the opportunity for visuals to be affected by voice acting exists doesn't always mean it was intended to. While less visual specificity during after-recording could be seen as a positive for the Seiyu, it's more likely to be an indication of how behind schedule the animation production is. Intentional pre-scoring is made possible by beginning voice recording before main animation production begins, but deliberately flipping this part of the typical anime workflow like this would imply a certain narrative desire from the director. After all, the look and feel of Akira is far from the only form pre-scoring takes in anime. Otomo had a vision for that particular film, and pre-scoring accomplished part of that vision through its effect on dialogue animation. Conversely, when Hiroshi Nagahama was approached to direct the Detroit Metal City anime, he didn't even think an adaptation was necessary, believing that the source material was already perfect. When he did take the offer, he mentioned deliberately preserving details from the manga, such as character designs and panel divisions, but he also used pre-scoring, which, from what I'd guess, was to maximize the appeal of the original dialogue. This goes for animation from any country, but the end visual result comes down to numerous factors. While films like Akira or any Disney hit may have such a high amount of mouth animation frames due to the voices being pre-recorded, most normal anime only use 3. Well, Tentai Senshi Sunred is a pre-scored comedy anime that only has 2 frames for that. There are likely other circumstantial factors at play, but the reasons anime staff may give for how and why they use pre-scoring will vary in specifics, yet it always seems to tie back to strengthening a certain aspect of a particular narrative in a particular way. Sometimes it's to get a certain kind of comedic or dramatic timing, others may be focused on more visual aspects, or it can be used to magnify the intended effect of a story beat. According to a tweet from PA Works president Kenji Horikawa, even Shirobako had a pre-scored scene, which became one of the funniest and most satirical moments of the entire show.
そんなんだからアニメ業界しぼんでいくんすよ。昭和じゃないんだから。
それより花尻さんのお尻見てくださいよ。
尻が喋るわけじゃない。
わかんないですよ。
いい子だし、ツイッターのフォロワー数の多い順に適当に選んじゃいましょう。いい加減うちと恋の事務所からは選んでくださいや。手ぶらじゃ帰れないし、上司にも僕怒られちゃう。
おっぱいもでかいし、おっぱい関係ないでしょ。少しはあるでしょ。
Some directors even commit themselves to this workflow. But even in cases like this, its function can vary depending on the narrative.
高畑自身も俳優たちの芝居から絵のイメージを膨らませる。少しずつニュアンスを変えながら芝居を模索していく。
ご飯を味噌汁に混ぜるな。
こうビシャッと決めるという感じがはっきりした方が面白いです。
ご飯を味噌汁に混ぜるな。ご飯を味噌汁に混ぜるな。
そうやろうか。そうやろうか。そうやろうか。そうやろうか。そうやろうか。できへん。
While several of Takahata's films used pre-scoring to various extents, Only Yesterday integrated it for visual authenticity, during segments that cover the protagonist's adult life, reflecting her more nuanced view of the world compared to childhood.
アニメーションっていうのはなんていうかな、可愛げなちょっとこうおちょぼ口風な可愛い顔はよく描けるんですけどね、本当ににっこりした顔って非常に難しいんですよ。筋肉がこうなかなかないもんですから、アニメーションっていうのはそれをそのニコッとしたことでね、その自分でもそれでその乗り切っていくし、人にもいい印象を与えるっていうのはそういう感じをですね、欲しいと思ったんです。
それ
皮肉ですか？
いや、まさか。
Perhaps the director most well known for having all their works be pre-scored is Matsuo, whose shows don't look out of place next to many other TV anime, yet often exhibit realistic conversational overlap.
ユウノさんだったんだ。
シンクロ。
お前一人で外に出るなって。
だから二人で来た。
誰と？
玉木だ。この子ってシンクロさんの何ですか？奉仕してくれる男を探しに行った。
あのエロ女。
エルしたない。
玉木さんみたいな人のことだよ。
シンクロさん、子供の前でそんな言葉は子供扱いするな。
This instinctive approach to interactive dialogue becomes more feasible when actors don't have to wait for predetermined cues, but instead judge for themselves how their character would participate in an almost improvisatory manner. And speaking of improv,
ルールがゆとり。
this is the work of Kotaro Ichido, a director whose works are computer-generated in some form and distinctly crude. Alongside some previous examples, pre-scoring's potential for unique comedic timing seems to make it a suitable option for gag shows like this, where the unrefined visuals match the less deliberate aspects of vocal delivery, like stutters and giggles. It can lead to a very genuine feeling sound quality that's more akin to a radio show than an anime.
ホームランの時はどうするんですか？こうカキーン、わあ、あれはきっとホームランみたいな感じで。はい、ホームラン。
Particular works like Tesagure Bukatsumono and the recent Himote House may not look pretty, but much like the genie in Aladdin, this kind of improv is an example of something that can only be done in pre-scoring.
みんな一番恥ずかしい生パンでやる。
Of course, a great deal of creativity is involved with voice acting of any kind. Improv or ad-libbing is still very much possible with locked-in visuals, and it goes without saying that an actor's very delivery of a line can completely recontextualize its original function. It might seem strange, but the mentality gained from learning improv can even benefit dubbing work, helping the performance feel active and natural instead of result-oriented. Every choice an actor or director makes is an opportunity to flesh out and humanize their character, adding detail and nuance to their performances. The consistent caveat for all of these facts is simply that pre-recorded voices will always have more of these opportunities. If this workflow means the actors are wearing the animation like a mask, then in dubbing, the actor is the one who needs to fit the performance that's been provided by the animation. The timing of predetermined visuals will eventually conflict with an actor's own understanding of, well, the character's autonomy. In an interview with AkibaSoken.com, Mamiko Noto, the seiyuu of Moriko Morioka in Recovery of an MMO Junkie, mentioned that because of the pre-scoring in that show, she was able to play Morioka's reaction as she truly was. And that way of phrasing it in particular implies that if the character was recorded in the normal after-recording circumstances, part of who she fundamentally was would need to be withheld from the show. The scattered nature of all these exceptions I've been able to find does suggest that these benefits will only be shared by a handful of titles. However, there is a field of Japanese animation where pre-scoring may not be so uncommon. Unlike traditional animation, where characters are drawn thousands of times into individual frames, 3D CG characters are treated more like highly elaborate puppets that blend through a series of poses that the software calculates the movements between. This can create a feeling of smoothness, realism, and consistent modeling that is still possible in 2D, but very resource-consuming and difficult to pull off at the same level. Some would argue that this closer adherence to photorealism needs to carry over into the performances, suggesting that pre-scoring is the optimal choice for this medium. Whether or not that suggestion is wholly true, not all 3D anime achieve or even aim for these aspects of realism, as we've seen with Ishidate's works. Pre-scored series with fully 3D characters have also existed in years prior, such as The World of Golden Eggs and Scarecrow Man. but I think recently there have been examples of CG series that can go toe-to-toe with some 2D titles in terms of exposure, some of which have been revealed to contain pre-scoring. Shows like Kado, The Right Answer, films like Hana and Alice, and of course, the major works of Polygon Pictures. Having established themselves with a great deal of work on overseas animation already, it's no surprise that this studio is so prominent in the market for fully 3D anime. Jun Watanabe represented Polygon at a 2016 Anitsuku seminar, explaining that the studio itself has adopted the pre-scoring method for most of their projects. When it comes to finding titles that'll have unpredictable voice acting, 3D CG might be a good place fans can look to. Arguably, we already are. Don't forget that one of the most popular CG shows from last year owed a great deal to its performances. Land of the Lustrous stands out as a production for a multitude of reasons, but one of them was how the 3D animation was guided, not just by elements of hand-drawn animation, but also some of the best vocal talent in the entire country. Joji Nakata, Yuko Sanpei, Maria Issei, Romy Park, Saori Hayami, Chiwa Saito, and so many others, but especially Tomoyo Kurosawa as the protagonist Fos.
Bachiri, kawaii, ririshi.
We've heard them all in other anime, but to witness them act with even more creative freedom at their disposal was truly something else, allowing us to empathize with a cast of sentient rocks in such a distant setting. It's worth pointing out that not all pre-scored anime work quite the same way. I imagine some people are wondering why I haven't brought up Aku no Hana since it was rotoscoped, but that show had some characters dubbed over by totally different actors. Likewise, sound director Yukio Nagasaki has worked on CG titles like Land of the Lustrous and Kado The Right Answer, as well as ones where animation was predetermined by one set of actors before being dubbed over by the actual cast. Nagasaki has commented on the difficulty of dubbing over another actor's performance, but that's something I'd like to save for part 2. On both of those notes, what I'd like to end this part on is a different example of what could be considered half-and-half pre-scoring. It's actually pretty recent, having been added to international Netflix a few weeks ago after having aired on Japanese TV prior. This is Dragon Pilot, Hisone and Maso-tan, or Hisomaso for short. Tomoyo Kurosawa was a part of this series too, and in an Animate Times interview has mentioned that recording was done with storyboards as a visual reference. While this would typically be seen as a sign of delayed animation production, director Shinji Higuchi mentioned his desire for actors to have expressive freedom, and for the animation to be influenced by them instead, meaning that the lack of visual clarity inherent to storyboards was an intentional part of this half-and-half recording arrangement. While the seiyuu couldn't quite do whatever they wanted, they were allowed to take as much or as little time with their delivery as they thought best. This can be felt especially with the protagonist Hisone, who's prone to going on these emotionally driven rants.
原付を貸すことがなぜ大丈夫に直結するのでしょうか。それに私はまだ非実弾に足を踏み入れたことも柿安飛行班長も存じ上げないのですか。
え？なんか言った？
But then there's Asobi Asobase, which I've seen quite a few folks on my social media praise for the voice work. And as it turns out, director Seiji Kishi and sound director Satoki Ida have worked together very consistently, including some pre-scored titles, such as Tentai Senshi Sunred, Tsuki ga Kirei, and according to some recent articles, this show too. Of course there's Spacebug, because who could forget about that, but Attack on Titan wasn't even Yuki Kaji's most recent encounter with pre-scoring. Other than being in Dragon Pilot, he's mentioned its use in Makia, and that it enhanced the film's emotional appeal. It's also a part of other recent hit films like Fireworks and the Monster Strike sequel from Studio Orange. Granted, for this video I could only go off of what's been documented so far, and even then I didn't have time for everything. Over the years and to this day, pre-scoring has proven itself to be much more than just a means of getting detailed lip sync. There will likely be directors who continue to push for its use. The growth of fully 3D CG series may also keep it alive. And as always, no one can predict the possibilities of new technology. Up close, pre-scoring completely reroutes the creative process. However, from a distance, it can simply be another means of drawing out subtext from the narrative. Fans obviously want good performances no matter how it's done, but understanding workflow is a step towards appreciating how voice actors go about adding narrative weight of their own. But with all this said, there's much more to the discussion of Prelay versus dubbing. Even with so many anime that don't have access to the benefits of pre-scoring, seiyuu have been able to give so many unforgettable performances that are loved worldwide. Foreign dubs, like the ones we often discuss on this channel, have also been able to succeed, despite dubbing not being the main method of animation voiceover in America. And even then, there are times when ADR is used in Prelay projects. And of course, there are factors that have stopped pre-scoring from becoming more common in anime. But all of that will have to wait for next time.
僕は鉄を
If it felt like this video was trying to downplay the value of anime that don't use pre-scoring, or insinuating that the Japanese industry is inferior to the West because of after-recording, I apologize, as that was never the intention. In our next video, not only will we explore why this workflow may not be common among anime, but also some potential strengths of the post-animation dubbing process, in both original Japanese voiceover and the foreign dubs we usually discuss on this channel. This video wouldn't have been possible without a lot of help. Huge thanks to both Frog-kun and karice for helping us understand resources that were in Japanese. Links to their sites are in the description, so please check out their work. If you're interested in content like this, please consider supporting us on Patreon, as it allows us to do things like pay for translation assistance. Special thanks to those donating already, in particular Reagan Carriere, Seth Phillips, JR Pictures, and Unknown Secret 1000. Also, thanks to Liborek and kVin from Sakugaburu, plus TheCanipaEffect for answering some questions, as well as my friend Leo for helping explain some principles of 3D animation to me. Links to all their content and social media are in the description.